There is a consensus out there, but what if the consensus on the lockdowns is wrong? Increasingly, it seems that there are some chips in that facade. People are asking questions. Some contrarian thinking is being proven as valuable, perhaps even correct in the face of this so-called consensus. One person out there along the lines of Alex Berenson and some others we've had on the show, Britt Hume and people like that, who are willing to at least ask questions. Another person who's doing that is Jordan Schatchel. He is an investigative journalist and a national security analyst, and he joins us now. Jordan, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right, Jordan, what does the data show us at this point about lockdowns? And try to give us, as much meat on the bone as you can, because the moment you say the lockdown isn't the cure-all, people start screaming in your face. I'm sure you've had this too. Tell us what you're seeing and what everyone at home across the country needs to know.
So what's interesting is that now that we've been in lockdown for so long, people have been able to study and kind of guess and have a lot of solid scientific evidence about when new cases started, when deaths happened. And the evidence seems to be pretty much a consensus at this point that lockdowns were not the cause of cases slowing down, that there's actually kind of this natural pandemic curve. No matter what you do, the virus seems to spread anyway. And that's unfortunate, but the positive side of things is that it's not killing nearly as many people as we thought it would. And, the death rate is maybe 20, 30 times lower than the initial World Health Organization estimate of 3.4%. But yeah, so lockdowns, you saw that they happened really in March for the most part in the United States, sometime in late February in some places in Western Europe. But the data that's now coming back is showing us that really simple prevention advice like hand washing, keeping a little bit of more physical distancing, not shaking hands at the height of a pandemic, that kind of stuff seems to have worked. But the lockdowns seem to have just been overkill and have done nothing to stop the spread. And then, of course, we just kind of created this massive economic and societal problem on top of our virus problem with lockdown.
And now there's this fight over how quickly we can reopen. What do you think about the metrics that are put in place, specifically the demands for massive increases in testing and then also an accompanying tracing system for people who have the disease?
It doesn't make sense to me when I look at the numbers, if you start with the tracing point, because if there's 30,000 Americans confirmed positive tests per day, most people admit that they're catching fewer than 1 in 10, even lockdown advocates. So you extrapolate that number and you're getting at least 300, 400,000 Americans infected per day right now. There's no way that you're going to be able to catch up to tens of millions of cases that have already passed and that are already, in the midst of people contracting the virus. So the contact tracing thing seems to be a play at, a massive surveillance state. And it's not even effective because there's so many asymptomatic cases. What are you going to do besides calling someone and say, oh, you took the metro the other day with someone that had the virus? What are they going to do? They're going to sit in their house for 21 days? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And this also involves hiring tens of millions of people to do this contact tracing. And what are we going to do? We're going to train them. It just seems like this giant government boondoggle in the making. And when it comes to testing, it's good to have like a snapshot, but what are you going to do? Like, shove a Q-tip up people's noses every 2 weeks to make sure that our testing levels are appropriate? It just seems that the best way to treat this is with common sense. You focus on the elderly and vulnerable, and then the vast majority of the population doesn't really have anything to worry about, but the fear mongering has made people, under the impression that they're going to catch this virus and drop dead within 6 hours. And the data just doesn't show us that at all.
We're speaking to Jordan Schatchel. He's an investigative journalist and a national security analyst. Jordan, the professor, Neil Ferguson, who had the model that showed the huge number of deaths in the UK and the United States, that was a turning point in this. I think that was part of what pushed President Trump not just to go for the 15 days to slow the spread, but just to expand well beyond that into now, what are we, 50 some odd days into this lockdown status? that professor has never shared how how he came up with that projection. And now we find out that he also broke quarantine while he had COVID-19 to go sleep with his married lover. Side note, but although for some people I don't think it's really a side note, I see a lot of hypocrisy here. How can we be expected to listen to the models now when we haven't even been? It has not even been explained to us why the models used before were so wrong.
These people are so dishonest. And you really see that with the Sweden example, where they say, the lack of social distancing or the death tolls going up is always our fault in their minds. It's not their models failing or their prediction models failing. It's always some other result that's out of their projection capacity. But with this guy Ferguson, he never released the code behind his models, so people don't really know what his assumptions were. People don't know how he projected that 1.1 million to 2.2 million Americans dead. And unfortunately, there's been no transparency efforts at all. This is a guy who ended up shutting down the world economy because he successfully freaked enough people out. And now we're learning that he's been associated with these hard left climate change fanatics. And if we listen to those people, we'd be, starving ourselves to death. So there's so many problems here and such a lack of oversight. And the panic is really what set everything off. And he is one of the main forces for that panic.
You had a tweet here. If you didn't project lockdown as a surefire disaster from day one, it's time to re-examine your thought processes. The negatives were guaranteed. USA needs an injection of common sense and more who lean on the side of liberty as opposed to those who cower and choose safe tyranny. On this point of choosing to cower, it seems to me that the lockdown crowd is now faced with the reality that many of us saw coming weeks ago, which is that no matter what, as you said, the virus is still spreading and the virus will still be out there even if we were to hit these benchmarks. So what exactly was the plan? If it wasn't to protect hospital capacity, what do they really think we were trying to do here with the lockdown?
Yeah, so after a couple of weeks, they sold us this false idea that lockdown was not only going to slow the spread, now it was going to stop the spread. And I think a lot of us, you included, were saying this wasn't the original goal. What are you guys talking about? How are we going to stop the spread of a virus that we can't even see, that's moving around so fast and infecting millions of people so quickly? How are we going to stop this thing? And the answer was basically, just wear a mask and you keep social distancing and this is all going to work out great. But the virus has spread. We know we have the death data that's very targeted to senior living centers and sick and elderly people, and that it doesn't particularly affect healthy people. And it's just kind of like bizarre that people have bought into this propaganda, unfortunately, that it affects everyone equally. And they were sold this false bill of hope that said, if only you listen to these government mandates, we are going to keep you safe. And that, unfortunately, has not played out at all. We have new unemployment numbers that are going to come out tomorrow. I'm sure there'll be another 5 million or so unemployed. So we'll have like 35 million unemployed. There's new data coming out saying that people are going to develop late-stage cancer because they missed all their, checkups. They missed their chemo. They've been freaked out to even go to the hospital. Some people aren't even allowed to go to the hospital because they banned non-elective procedures for so long. So there's so many predictable consequences of locking people in their homes, whether it was the physical toll, the mental toll, and from the public health standpoint, it never made sense from the first place.
What are you seeing, from the lockdown crowd at this point that wants to continue this or wants us to wait even longer? I've heard some of this. Look at Australia. They've done it right. People pointing to other countries. Have you looked at the Australia model specifically? I would just think that the seasonality issue is big because they're obviously in a different part of the cycle for upper respiratory disease based on the season that they're in the southern hemisphere. But have you looked at any other countries that give us lessons that are worth learning and that we should look to?
I think what's very interesting coming out of, you're right, I think the seasonal issue is big because if you look at the Middle East, specifically the Gulf region, the Arab states, and even as far north as Lebanon and Israel, they really never developed a coronavirus problem. I think the countries that have the most deaths have around 200, 250 deaths. And it's not like this virus, we already know this virus has been moving around since at least November 17th of 2019. So it's affecting populations in a different way. And I think climate has a lot to do with it. In terms of countries that successfully contained it, you can look at East Asia and how they had institutional distrust of China in particular. Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, Singapore were the first to act, and they acted a couple months before we did for a variety of reasons. And I don't think that the president would have ever had the capital to ever been able to pull off shutting down the country the way that some of these other countries did. So that's kind of like an irrelevant debate. But in terms of like the institutional distrust of China worked because they saw something happening in Wuhan and they immediately took action. And that seems to have had enormous benefits by just refusing to accept the premises of these global health organizations like the World Health Organization and what China was saying about the virus and how everything's okay and everything's fine. They acted aggressively and preemptively to stop it.
If you could, would you tell the president to reopen the country? I mean, I know it's not up to him, it's up to the states. But I mean, if you could reopen at least into the first phase of the guidance from the federal level, starting next week, would you do it?
Oh, yeah. It's such an obvious point right now. Like, even if, let's say you bring, you open up baseball games and you have half or quarter capacity, what you're doing when you're reopening is you're subjecting the healthy population that's not particularly threatened by the virus to the virus, maybe a little more than under lockdown when it was spreading anyway. So unless you're advocating, sending grandma and grandpa out into the streets, out away from their nursing homes, that would be the only issue, is when you are moving vulnerable people back into crowded society. If you're moving non-vulnerable people into crowded society, I don't see much of an issue. And I think you're seeing that play out in states that didn't do hard lockdowns, and in Georgia where they're opening up, and there hasn't been a new spike in cases or anything like that.
Jordan Schatchel, everybody. Jordan, thanks so much for joining us, man. We appreciate it, and keep it up on Twitter.
Thanks so much.
They really haven't had anyone in charge, except the president, who every day has a different. He spends half his time on whims, medicines that don't work. He spends half his time on blaming other people or other issues. He's now blaming China. Well, guess what, Mr. President? It doesn't. Even if it came from China, and even if it came from China only, why didn't you do something about it? South Korea did. Australia did. The idea is to deal with the problem, not just spend all your time with pointing fingers of blame. It doesn't make anybody better.
If it came from China, Chuck Schumer, we're still going to play that game. If it came from China. Apparently, Chuck hasn't read the news reports from earlier in the week that tell us all that the Wuhan coronavirus was not just something the Chinese government lied to the world about in the early days, but also they used that period where the Wuhan coronavirus was being lied about by the Chinese Communist Party. They were stockpiling PPE and stockpiling gear and things that they would need to fight against the virus, while telling the rest of the world, hey, don't worry about this. Don't worry, it's fine. There's no human-to-human or human-to-human transmission is not a concern. And the World Health Organization parroted that. I do wonder at some point if we could ask Chuck Schumer, if the U.S. went to war with China but Trump was president, would he be rooting for China or be rooting for the U.S.? You start to wonder where the loyalty of some of these Democrats really lies here. There's no question that this came from China, but notice Chuck Schumer, if it came from, no, scientists, everybody who is looking at this based on the facts agrees it came from China. And that's not a surprise at all. Upper respiratory infections like this have come from China, stretching back for decades, because of not just the population density in China, but also the way that they raise animals for slaughter as part of their industrial agriculture and farming, and they also have these wet markets. So that's why this comes. I mean, there was a book that I've told you all about that I read a few years ago called Pandemic, which was really interesting and good prep for this situation, which I didn't even realize was going to be the case. I've just always found pandemic disease terrifying and fascinating as a result of how scary it is. But it has been known, the scientific community has known that the flu viruses year in and year out tend to come from China. These upper respiratory infections are coming from China. And it has been the laboratory of pandemics for a long time. The world's largest petri dish, the Chinese Communist Party, is overseeing that and not doing enough by any stretch to try to stop it. But Schumer's big problem is with Trump, not with China. That's not surprising to any of us, but it should be a reminder of how grotesque the Democrats are willing to be in this process. And also the media here, the media's willingness to go along with lies and to not only parrot, I mean really parrot Chinese, the Xinhua news agency, parroting Chinese propaganda, straight up state propaganda, but also to continue with lies like this. And this is a lie that is particularly annoying for me because I was faced with this. I was on the Bill Maher show about a week or two before the pandemic really broke out in this country, and there was concern, but everybody was still thinking maybe it was going to blow over. And one of the things they kept saying was Trump has called it a hoax, which is a lie. Just like it's a lie that Trump said there were good people among the neo-Nazis were good people in Charlottesville. That's a lie. You look at the transcript, it's clear that that's not what he said. And I will never back down on this. And it's very frustrating to me that people continue to propagate that lie all across the media spectrum. Trump did not call this a hoax. And yet, Morning Joe, the biggest jerk on morning TV, really, this is what he continues to say. Play 17.
And that's what concerns me about the coronavirus coming to middle America and the president delivering a very mixed message that bluntly makes a lot of his supporters in middle America in these areas that could be so badly affected and that are so ill-equipped to handle this virus. It's making a lot of these people still call the coronavirus a hoax. I have heard it from friends who say many of their associates still consider this to be a hoax, that it's overblown, that it's just not the case. That's deadly thinking.
Notice how he conflates your hoax and it's overblown. There are states where they've had a couple of hundred deaths from this, but they've been on lockdown with all businesses shut down for almost 2 months now. That is the definition of overblown. So in some places it clearly is overblown. That's not the same thing as saying it's a hoax. But this is how the propaganda mechanism works. Take two disparate concepts, try to mold them into one and push that out there and slander anybody who will say maybe this isn't as bad as they're telling us it is by pretending they're saying there is no virus or there is no problem. Nobody says that. No one that I talk to, and I'm talking to actual conservatives, not like Joe Scarborough, all day long. I've got to tell you, I am really enjoying Savage Son by Jack Carr. I'm listening to the audiobook. I'm a few chapters in right now. And as somebody who comes from the intelligence community, as I do, got a CIA background, I love that when Jack is writing about this stuff, the special operations side, the intelligence, espionage, and just international relations piece, he really understands it. So from the strategic level down to the tactical, Jack Carr brings you right into the action. You're learning as you listen or as you read. I'm doing the audiobook. I recommend you do the same. Go download Savage Son wherever you listen to audiobooks. It's a fantastic listen. It moves so quickly. It'll bring you right into the action right away. Why do people hunt? And what is it in us that brings out that violence in warfare that also is a bulwark of society against evildoers? He deals with some interesting philosophical components in Savage Son. Download Savage Son by Jack Carr, the audiobook. It's fantastic. Download it today. Oh, the Trump haters on the right, or at least theoretically on the right. I don't think it's possible to be someone who would vote for the insane socialist Democrats and still call oneself a conservative. But there are people out there who do take that approach. There are the people who find themselves justifying rooting for and voting for and supporting that which they've claimed their entire adult lives up until now, up until Trump, to oppose. But you have this group called the Lincoln Project, founded by George Conway, Steve Schmidt. I mean, Steve Schmidt is the guy who was involved with the ill-fated McCain campaign, as you recall. He's the guy who goes on MSNBC and he's like, Donald Trump is evil and dumb and I hate him. And he says the dumbest things I've ever heard on television in my life. I mean, it's him and Navarro. I mean, there's a certain echelon of political analysts who are, quote, from the right or on the right in some capacity, whose job is to go on TV, trash Trump, and look like morons all the time. And they do a very good job at that. But yeah, it's Conway, Schmidt, Rick Wilson, who's completely lost his mind. And also, I mean, I've just seen, look, the guy, I've never had any personal beef with him. And and I don't have any personal beef with the guy. I don't know him. He doesn't know me. I don't really care. But some of the conduct and some of the stuff I've seen him do on Twitter, I'm just like, come on, man. Like, what is wrong? I mean, he's psychotically anti-Trump, which a lot of people are. But I think he also just crosses the line sometimes. I don't know any of these guys personally, though. So it's not. And I like to tell you that, too, if I don't like someone. Because some of these people I tell you are jerks I know and have dealt with. I don't know any of these guys. I met Wilson once briefly in a green room. He was fine. He was pleasant. And I see, I also make that distinction because there's a difference for me between someone whose work I think is odious and someone that I know as a human being who I think is a total turd. And I tell you, there are people at CNN that I know as people. I know what they're like, and they're total turds. So that's why I tell you that I know them, and then we add that additional layer onto it. But here with the Lincoln Project, these guys are rooting for the other side. So, I mean, they're running ads for the other side. So, I mean, they're effectively turncoats to conservatism. George Conway, married to Kellyanne Conway, and this is I don't know. I can't explain any of this stuff, folks. I actually met the person that introduced them or claims to have introduced them a long time ago. And she's like, it's a tough situation that they're dealing with right now. Kellyanne has always been very, very friendly to me and does the show. I think she does a great job on TV. The George Conway thing, hey, it's a marriage. I don't get into any of that. That's none of my business. But George Conway's involved in this. Steve Schmidt, John Weaver, Rick Wilson, and their play on words ad here is morning in America, like MOUR. Ha ha ha. So clever. And I'll play it for you just so you can kind of hear the saccharine, wimpy, nonsensical conservatives behind this. What do they think America really needs to hear right now?
There's mourning in America. Today, more than 60,000 Americans have died from a deadly virus Donald Trump ignored.
I just want to jump in there. A deadly virus that Donald Trump ignored. Really? Did he ignore it when he was the one that shut down flights from China against the advice of the so-called experts in the medical policy echelon, and certainly against the Democrats? The Democrats' biggest concern, this is true of de Blasio, it's true of Newsom, it's been true of Pelosi. What really scared them was the possibility of xenophobia and racism when it was clear this virus had broken out in China and was spreading all over the world. Their fear was not millions of people will contract this and hundreds of thousands of people will die and China's lying about it and it could destroy our economy and threaten our way of life and our freedoms. That was not their concern. Their concern was that maybe somebody would say something racist, which would be a very stupid thing to say. I mean, racism is inherently stupid and illogical. So, conservatives, we have to keep sitting here and keep going through judging or mistreating or even elevating the treatment of somebody, but changing your treatment or changing your observation about another human being based upon their ethnic origin, their skin color, is inherently not just morally wrong, but also illogical and stupid. So that's why we have to sit here and to keep going, look, we don't need these reminders from virtue signaling libs about, don't be racist. We know not to be racist. All right? The libs are the ones that actually are always judging people by skin color and how valuable they are to different enterprises based upon skin color. We look at people and just say, this is a human being. I want to treat this person as a person first and foremost, and we're all deserving of equal dignity and equal rights. But their big concern was that we all needed to be lectured on racism as this pandemic was breaking out all over the world. So to say that Trump ignored this, did Fauci ignore this? He was saying, in January and into February that we're really at no risk from this. What was Trump supposed to do? Oh, that's right. He was also being impeached by the psycho Democrats. Let's not forget that. They impeached this president on nothing. It was ridiculous. It was going nowhere. We're not allowed to think that might have hampered the executive branch's ability to focus on this and get all the best information on this, trying to prevent the destruction of this presidency because Democrats are psycho crybabies who can't accept that they lost the 2016 election, still with another election just months away. Oh, but no, we have to have the Lincoln Project pseudo-libs lecture us more.
With the economy in shambles, more than 26 million Americans are out of work, the worst economy in decades. Trump bailed out Wall Street.
Trump bailed out Wall Street. The Paycheck Protection Program is specifically designed to get money into the hands of workers from businesses all across the country. But notice how they just focus on the Trump bailed out Wall Street. Democrats, if you go to any of the big firms, and I know this because I'm here in New York and I know people that work at all the major firms, you go around Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs is almost like an appendage of the DNC. I mean, they'll give money to both sides just because they want goodwill and access from the policy level. But if you're wondering what the politics are of the major investment banks, for example, they're overwhelmingly Democrat. Overwhelmingly. It's not even close. This Wall Street is a Republican fat cat enclave is a myth. It's a myth. And I'm here, and I know. I grew up in a family with a dad who, thank God, is a Republican who loves this country and believes in the Second Amendment and believes in freedom. But he worked on Wall Street. He was a stockbroker. I've known these people my whole life. It used to be that Wall Street was a little more of a bastion of capitalism, and now Wall Street, it's all this big corporate stuff, and left-wing identity politics has taken over. Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and all these places. That's anyway. So that's just another. They're just spreading. They're spreading crap here. This is a. But let's hear more. It's kind of fun to just dissect the stupidity of the Lincoln Project for a few minutes. And I'm enjoying it. It's not COVID-19, thank God. So we can, well, although the ad is dealing with it, but at least we're not having to analyze more wrong numbers and more wrong analysis from people on the lockdown crowd.
But not Main Street. This afternoon, millions of Americans will apply for unemployment. And with their savings run out, many are giving up hope. Millions worry that a loved one won't survive COVID-19. There's mourning in America. And under the leadership of Donald Trump, our country is weaker and sicker and poorer. And now, Americans are asking, if we have another 4 years like this, will there even be an America?
I mean, how much more disgraceful, dishonest? It's all Trump's fault. This is a pandemic virus. Is the poor leadership in the UK responsible for the much higher per capita death rate there? Is the unacceptable democratically elected leader of Italy, of France, of Spain, are they all just horrible people like Donald Trump because they've been hit worse than we have by this? This is like blaming Trump for a natural disaster. This would be like if we had the worst earthquake in the history of the planet and we had mass destruction and devastation and we're trying to recuperate and people saying Donald Trump didn't stop the earthquake. These people are morons. And actually, in the case of, Steve Schmidt is dumb. I mean, MSNBC loves him because he's made a living now. And people have become famous as former Republicans. And they're useful now. They'll be discarded shortly when they're no longer useful for bashing Trump. When there's a realignment, or if you have a Democrat in the White House, they won't be celebrated and put on TV. The most overexposed people in media, or rather the people that get the most exposure relative to what their audience size is, are never Trumpers. And it's very obvious why that is. It's because, Zucker over at CNN, who's an odious little person, and MSNBC, and notice Andy Lack just stepped down, and some shady stuff behind the scenes there about why, the chief of NBC News had to step down. But anyway, you look at what's going on at these places, and they love putting these former Republicans and people like Tom Nichols. And Tom Nichols started out writing for The Federalist. The Federalist. That's how this guy built some credibility in the conservative movement. And then he became a total turncoat. And now they make excuses for like AOC and Bernie Sanders. And these people are absolutely nuts. How can you claim to have principles? You know, and there are other people out there who I think really believe they're not just conning the public or engaged in an exploitation for just monetary and exposure gain. There are other people out there but I've been very disappointed in, you know, how wrong they were, for example, on Russia collusion. And they don't take they won't change any of their earlier statements on it. They won't say that they won't say they were wrong. No one will admit, it seems, anymore when they're wrong about Trump. You just won't do it. They won't do it. And that's been true for years now. But this Lincoln Project is a disgrace. And I just had to take a couple swings at it. It's so gross, the whole thing. Well, what do they want to have? They want Joe Biden? They want Joe, I lie about stuff all the time, Biden to be the nominee? That's really the plan here? That's what we're supposed to think is such a... He would... Remember, this isn't Trump versus some super genius who would have done an amazing job and has a great record. This is Trump versus people who are clearly... I mean, in the case of Biden, someone who clearly has no idea what the heck is going on, does not understand where he is, and is really just kind of a joke. I mean, they won't put it that way, but I will put it that way. I mean, Biden is a very, very unfunny joke, and yet here we are being told that he would be so much better as a candidate. I'm sorry, I don't buy it, not even a little bit. Oh wait, Trump. One thing, Trump weighed in. How could I not let the Trumpster have his say here? He talked about the Lincoln. Producer Mark, where is this one? I know we had this one somewhere here. He has a new name for them. Oh, yes. Play clip 7.
I saw a project, a thing called the Lincoln Project, and I would have them change the name to the Losers Project, because if you take a look at Schmidt, it's George Conway. The guy Kellyanne must have done a big number on him. But it's George Conway and it's some other people, Weaver. Every one of them I either defeated or they lost by themselves. But it's a group of major losers. They're Republican losers. And if they would really think about it, I have 252 beautiful, brand new, conservative, wonderful judges, 2 Supreme Court judges that are great. We produced the greatest economy in history until a month and a half ago, where we got hit by the virus, so we had to close it down, and we'll do it again. We've rebuilt our military. We've done things that nobody has been able to do. I've gotten the greatest tax cuts in history, in the history of our country, the biggest tax cuts. The Democrats want to raise your taxes. I've gotten regulation cuts, the biggest in the history of our country, no matter how long a president served. With all of that, I guess they don't like me.
They do not like him. We do know that. They definitely hate the president. Here's what the president said. Most of the money raised by this is also in a tweet. I mean, he really was going after them yesterday. Most of the money raised by the rhino losers of the so-called Lincoln Project goes into their own pockets. With what I've done on judges, taxes, regulations, healthcare, the military, veterans, choice, and protecting our great Second Amendment, they should love Trump. The problem is I beat them all. It really is just about them, and they pretend that it's about more than that. So the Trumpster, not to be trifled with by the Lincoln Project, but they're going to keep trying. They'll keep the scam going as long as they can.
Say improving conditions for seniors in nursing homes. Would it be a good idea to no longer send elderly patients who've tested positive for coronavirus or who are suspected to have coronavirus? Would it be a good idea to not send them back into their nursing homes where they then expose other vulnerable people?
Well, again, if the better care in that individual case is a hospital, of course that should be the go-to option. But there's going to be times where the nursing home is the place that can better care if it's set up that way. But remember, a lot of these are for-profit organizations. I think there's going to be a lot of questions about whether they put their residents first or whether they put profit first. But I don't like what's happening in the nursing homes. I want to see change, but I think in terms of each individual, it's a case-by-case. You got to figure out what's right for each senior.
Oh, it's the profit motive that's killing so many of our seniors here in New York. And I would note you're going to see across the country, I mean, nursing homes on a national level, based on the data we have from Europe, nursing homes have been the single worst place for loss of life. And in New York, it's been absolutely horrific. But notice de Blasio here, who him and Cuomo, they've had this rule in place that, you know, if someone comes out of the hospital and they think they have COVID and they're a senior, they go right back into the nursing home. That may have cost a lot of lives directly. But what does de Blasio do? The classic community organizer BS tactics you would expect from this guy. All of a sudden, he makes it about how the profit motive is the issue here. Oh, these rich fat cat senior citizen home owners weren't willing to take the necessary precautions. I mean, how could anyone think that this is? How could anyone think that this is anything other than the worst and most obvious CYA from a governor who has been MIA on trying to actually give us some leadership worth the name in this city? He's a total imbecile. I mean, he's really one of the worst politicians in America, and there's a long list that I could go through, but he is really, truly one of the absolute worst. I know I wanted to get away from the COVID-19 talk here for a second, but I just can't help but I saw this clip of de Blasio, and to make this about, you know, capitalism is the enemy. You're going to see more of that, though. There's going to be a rise in a push to use this moment of economic and societal crisis for furthering socialism. It's happening right now. Get ready for it.